Good afternoon, everyone. As everyone kind of comes into the space, we're really waiting for our students. I'll give you a picture of what today looks like. Thank you for making some time to join us. We see a number of adults. This conversation is really for students, but it's great that the adults are there so the students see some familiar faces from their building. We'd ask if you have any kind of audio, like your cell phone or something on, to please turn that off. If you're chewing gum or something like that, for our students, to make sure that you remove that so that when we're having conversation and are on Zoom, that's not visible either. And then outside of that, if there are other times when you're not speaking, to put yourself on mute. We do have the comments and chat open at the bottom, and so those chat items are allowing you to chat each other, chat the main public. If a question comes up that even one of the other guests would like to ask, certainly you can take yourself off mute or you can put it in the chat. This is a small group, and I think that just about everybody's on. It is 10:31, so I'll share with you kind of our first student equity panel conversation for this year. The context for the conversation. And as I share that context, I'll give just a moment. I think we have our last two guests that are joining us. As those two guests sign in from Topeka High, one is Mrs. Morrissey. She'll be signing in momentarily. And I think we have one other guest that may be joining as well. Maybe Miss Canty may be joining us as well from Topeka High. We'll do introductions momentarily, but I do want you to know this is live on YouTube. For our students, I know it's your either Trojan Charger or Scott time, so we're going to stay within that 30 minutes of Trojan Charger Scott time. And as we stay within that 30 minutes, then you'll be able to sign off at the end of that 30 minutes, somewhere around 11. Because we know that you have classes to get to. We ask for our adults to stay on so that we really use this time for student voices, and then we'll pose many of those same questions to the adults that are within the space at that time. All right, let's start with our introductions. You all know I'm Dr. Anderson, the superintendent, the proud superintendent of Topeka Public Schools, the first African-American female superintendent. So it's wonderful to be in this space with all of you. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Gray for introduction, then Dr. Morrell and Ms. Wagner.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Aaron Gray, Director of Instructional Services for Topeka Public Schools.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Tim Morrell. I'm the principal of TCALC, which is the Topeka Center for Advanced Learning and Careers.
Hi, I'm Amy Wagner, and I'm the proud assistant principal at French Middle School.
All right, Mr. Munoz, Mr. Carmana, and now Miss Janisha, what is your last name, young lady? In fact, why don't we start with you giving, okay, Ms. Hendricks. We'll go straight down the line. I'm just going down the line on my screen. So, and then after Ms. Hendricks, it's Mr. Frazier, Ms. Howell, and Mr. Hicks and Kelly, Mr. Kelly. Mr. Munoz?
Hello, Michael Munoz. I'm the regional manager for the JAG Kansas programs.
Mr. Carmana, you want to introduce yourself? And students, if you just take yourself off mute, I think we're small enough where you can introduce yourself and you probably won't trip over each other without me calling out your names.
Hi, my name's Matthew Carmona, and I'm a student at TCALC.
All right, and what grade are you in, Mr. Carmona?
I'm a junior, so I'm in 11th grade.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Janisha Hendricks, and I'm a senior, and I attend TCALC.
Hi, my name is Destiny Howell. I'm a French middle school student, and I'm in the 8th grade.
Hi, I'm DeAndre Hicks. I'm a Topeka High student. I'm a junior.
Hello, I'm Carlos Kelly. I'm a JAG specialist here at Topeka High School, and I'm also the head football coach.
Hello, I'm Christopher Fraser, and I attend to the school, French Middle School, and I'm in 8th grade.
I'm Triviante Thomas. I'm a senior at Topeka High.
My name is Alyssa Dipperine. I'm a junior at Topeka High School.
My name is Jeff Moore, senior at Topeka High School.
Hi, I'm Lisela, and I also attend Topeka High.
Hi, I'm Humphrey, and I'm a senior at Topeka High School.
Any other students that did not introduce themselves? And if not, do so now, please. I think that covers all of our students. And then our proud Topeka High principal is on with us. I'll leave it to her to give her introduction.
Good morning, Rebecca Morrissey, principal at Topeka High School and the proud principal of these fine young ladies and young men this morning.
And we want to thank both Dr. McDonald, Ms. Nordick, and Mr. True, who are in the background managing the social media and the platform that we're on. Thank you all for doing that. As we start today, the context for this session is focused on equity and restorative practices and safe schools. And so when we talk about safe schools, we're really going to look at a few headlines that are out there really about schools and safety, and then ask some pretty direct questions. And we ask for students to just be candid and share your thoughts. This is an opportunity for not only us within this space, but those that are watching YouTube or those that might see this recorded link later to just learn from you. We have middle school through high school at all levels on this space. And we also have a diverse group of students. Now, next Wednesday, we'll continue this equity series, and we'll actually have individuals that are school resource officers that are in that space having conversation about what that looks like from their perspective and their roles that they carry. And we'll be continuing this dialogue on equity and on a variety of issues that are current and pressing right now that we want to hear other voices from. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over first to Ms. Morrissey. When we say restorative practices, what does that mean? And then we'll begin our first question for our students.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Anderson. I had an opportunity about 8 years ago to learn a little bit about restorative practices. And one of the things that came up really clearly very quickly is that punitive practices of addressing behavior in schools, things like using suspensions, are certainly indicators and factors in students not finishing high school successfully. And more importantly, they contribute to the school to prison pipeline. It's something that we wanted to change. As we got involved with restorative practices, what it has offered us an opportunity to do is to really determine what a student has to be excluded from the school environment for. And there are certainly some very egregious behaviors that put everybody in danger that we would have to exclude a student for. But more often than not, we are able to temporarily isolate within our own setting students so that we can literally reteach behaviors and talk through what's going on. And in many cases, our students just simply did not know how to respond in a different manner. We've done restorative practices now in our building. All our staff is trained. I know many of the students sitting here have at least participated in Tier 1 circles. That's just talking about things in classrooms as a whole group, whether it's to get to know one another, which builds relationships, which is key, or whether it's actually to solve problems. And additionally, the Tier 2 and Tier 3 circles change the language. And the short version of our approach is we would like to do things with students instead of doing things to students. So we're hoping over time, and I know our seniors, I talked to a few of them about it, have seen a change in how we talk to students about behavior and things that have occurred that has kind of changed the dynamic for us. So that's kind of the short version.
Thank you, Ms. Morrissey. Okay, we're going to pull up a few headlines and then we're going to pose the first question. So the headlines that are currently in the news today and over the last really year, but certainly we pulled a few, just 2 or 3. This very first one is from CNN about a movement to push police out of schools is growing nationwide. We're going to go ahead and take that particular headline on off. The next one is from the New York Times about defunding the police in big cities and what that looks like since, and really focused on Seattle, Denver, and Minneapolis and the actions that they've taken. And then the next headline is more local. And again, this is a little bit of an older headline, but certainly within the last year. And it's really a perfect storm, defunding the police and COVID-19 leading to the biggest police budget cuts in decades. All right, so we're going to go ahead and take those off the screen. Keeping in mind those headlines that are facing all of us today, we'd like to hear from students about your thoughts as it relates to your own schools and the question specifically. And we're going to focus on community policing for the very first question. Can you share why, well, if you support removing officers, school resource officers from schools? And if so, why? And if not, why? So can you talk a little bit about that, the impact of school resource officers in schools? Is that something that you'd like to see be removed from schools, or is that something that, is that a group and that is helpful in schools? And if you could share the why behind your answer. Any student that takes themselves off mute and just speaks, we'll just kind of leave it open for you to kick it off.
Well, I'll go ahead and start because I obviously, as I already said, I go to TCALC. I attend the Law and Public Safety pathway. And in that pathway, both of the adults in my classroom, every time I come here, are active police officers. And having someone who's able to be that positive role model in your community as someone who is also involved in law enforcement, I feel like it can be seen as something that's very important in terms of building a positive relationship with police officers in your community. If your positive role model in your community is your teacher as well as a police officer.
Thank you. And we're going to come back to you about that as well, about that model in which an officer is actually your teacher, your instructor in class. Right. Thank you for sharing that. Other thoughts about removing school resource officers from schools? Should that occur? And if so, why? And if not, why not?
I feel like with a lot of other schools that I've seen, media-wise specifically, they do have a lot of other problems with police. And another interesting perspective I actually heard from a student at Topeka High was, you know, like police are there in schools to help prevent like school shootings or, you know, other impactful things that happen in schools that are very negative or traumatic. But what I found is that, you know, like those things still happen, they still occur. But I do think in terms of Topeka High School, I actually have not come across an officer or resource officer that wasn't helpful in a way. They've all been very nice. They've all been very kind. I do feel like for every school and for every, I don't know, campus where police are located, it's a different experience for everybody. But personally, for like Topeka High School, I found that they're helpful and they're kind, and I just do feel like it's different to other schools.
So if we build on that question, I'm going to go to Alyssa to give her thoughts. And as we build on that question, it sounds like schools can use them differently. Schools can use school resource officers differently. And how does Topeka High use officers differently that causes you, and perhaps even French, since we have middle school on here too, that causes you to feel as though this is a good experience? So that people who might be using officers in a different way, they learn from you in terms of what's the better way to utilize the support systems in buildings. But Alyssa, you were gonna speak to that question or the first one?
I would just say something I found that Topeka High does differently compared to other schools is our officers do communicate with us. Even within my middle school at Jardine, we did have an officer who was very kind and funny, and he would speak to us and he would just try to engage with us in a way. I feel like sometimes, or sorry, not to repeat myself, but officers will go into schools and they'll just kind of be there. But if you communicate with the kids, if you engage, and if you show them that you truly do care, you know, it shows them that you are there to help them. But in some other schools, like officers don't communicate with the students, they don't try to outreach, and it can have a negative impact because they feel like, you know, they're just there to be there. They're not there to help them out in a way that they feel that they need to be helped out, or they feel like, you know, how are they really going to keep me safe if they don't try to communicate with us or speak to us in a way that can make an impact in the long run. I do feel like Topeka High makes a difference because we all try to communicate with each other. We are a very diverse and big school, but even throughout that, I do feel like there are community aspects to that, and I do feel like a lot of schools could really, you know, take what I've learned within Jardine, within Topeka High, and try to put that towards other schools as well.
So you're saying relationships are key to the success of an officer in a building?
Yes.
And I can kind of speak to that and attest to that with Jardine. Probably the greatest role model I've had in middle school was Officer Kyle. And he wasn't a teacher, he wasn't a principal, he was an SRO. And he actually helped me mend and reconcile my relationship that I had with police, see, because I always had kind of an iffy, relationship with the police just based off what I've seen, like, YouTube and all that. And it didn't help that my dad also is a chaplain for the police department. So I was kind of feeling some type of way with him. He was able to teach me some things, mentor me. I actually got an opportunity to go to one of their camps that they hold. I think it was at French, that the SROs hold at for the police camps like that. So he was a great example, and I feel like if every kid gets a opportunity to have a authority figure or a police officer like that in their life, it can definitely mend the stigma that the African American community has with police.
And did you reach out to him, or did he reach out to you back in middle school when you had that experience? Because you're in high school now, right?
Yes, ma'am. It was actually a funny story. I had gotten my phone stolen. And so I had to go to somebody who could help me try to find it. And so we just got to talking, and he assured me everything was okay. He actually went out, found my phone, retrieved it, and got it back. And we just, a couple of times I would go eat lunch in his office. He would come check on me, make sure everything was all good and all that stuff. And actually, when my dad had got sick, I ain't talked to him in a year, but he still reached out to me and took me out to lunch. So I thank Officer Kyle for that.
So going back to the relationship, but you also just brought up another point of matters that happen within the school. The support was there in terms of that, in addition to the relationship piece. Thank you for sharing that, Mr. Hicks. Miss, and I called you Alyssa because I didn't want to pronounce your last name wrong, but in all respect, is it Miss, can you pronounce your last name, and do you have your hand up again?
Oh, sorry to lower it, but my last name is pronounced Dipnarine.
All right, I will get it right when I call on you again. All right, so moving on to our next question. Dr. Gray, do you have a question that you'd like to pose to our young people?
Yes, Dr. Anderson. Again, great comments from our students. What do you think about the national conversation about removing officers from schools?
I personally would have to disagree with that, mainly because, like Matthew Carmona said, every day I come in, my teachers are active officers on the force, and just to get to interact with these officers in an everyday setting and not just like when something bad happens, I think it's really important, especially at the age that we're at. And I think it's also important that officers are building bridges with young people in the community, and not just, and as a woman of color, that's important, but also just everybody in general.
Thank you, Ms.
Are officers different? And I see Mr. Moore has his hand up, so we're going to turn it over to him. But as you answer your question, Mr. Moore, the other question, are officers different in the community or seen differently than in schools? And when you talk about building bridges, how do we make sure that we have a bridge or even a more diverse group of officers that are, engaging with our young people? So are they different in community than in schools? And if so, how do we build that bridge? We're going to start with Mr. Moore on whatever question you were going to answer, and perhaps speak to that last one as well.
Yes, I was going to speak to the addressing removing police from school and say that I disagree with that notion, just simply for the fact that in community and everyday life outside of schools, police are an active force in our community, and they just have that feeling of keeping people safe. And I'd just say they hold up overall unity of just structure in society. And in schools, I think we are trying to shape and model kids to be ready for society and ready for the real world. And with police being an active, present piece of what real everyday life is going to be like, I think it's important that kids understand that police are going to be active and everywhere, and that a good positive police role model will help kids stay away from that disdain, that dislike from police.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. And I think we have a hand up as well.
Kind of going off what Jeff said, I do believe that having police in schools is just very important. I think nationally they shouldn't take it all away at once. By city, it's completely different, but there is a lot of stigma, especially like with people of color, when it comes to just police officers in general. And I do feel like having them in schools and the officers building relationships with students is so important in order to help break that stigma behind students and the stigma of officers not being able to help us in a way that we need. I do feel like growing up with them around you, knowing that they actually care in your community at such a young age will really help build that relationship in the future. So like when everyone was screaming like all cops are bad, like it was a difficult time, honestly, with all the events going on that were just honestly so tragic. And it sucks that people had to really experience those things at a completely different perspective. And I do feel like having them in schools is so important to breaking down that stigma and really showing, like it is a person thing, not a community thing. It's more of, situational, I guess, and it's less of like, okay, like DeAndre was talking about Officer Kyle. That was the same officer that was in my school. Like we went to that same middle school together. He really cared. And in order to answer your other question about how can we make sure that they're building relationships, just make sure that they're reaching out to students. Like teachers reach out to students if they feel like they're struggling, if they're acting different. I hope that our police officers can kind of see those patterns in students as well. And even officers here, like there are so many students at Topeka High, but I found that, like an officer will go with us to visit like our prom venue. Like when we went earlier to go visit the zoo like 2 weeks ago, there was an officer there with us and he was making conversation, asking questions along with us, working with us so we could get the most out of that we could. And that is just so important in order to building an impactful community of students that is going to break the stigma, of students that are going to help us understand how to build a better future in order for all of us to feel safe and that we're being understood by people who are supposed to be leaders in our community.
Thank you for that. I see Mr. Frazier and then Ms. Hendricks.
By far as taking officers out of the school, I would have to disagree with that because officers are everyday basic of activity and they would help come whenever somebody needs help. They would be there. Having SOR in buildings for school, if there's anybody talking about doing something or if anything's going to go down, they'll be the first people there to respond to it, and they would have to break out and help out. If like any dangers had came into the school, SR can immediately be there to address the situation, or if a kid or if anybody were to have any personal issues at home or in school, then they would be there to help out, make the kids safe so they can talk to the SORs. And I feel like that is a very important key.
Thank you, Mr. Frazier. Ms. Hendricks and then Ms. Howell. And I would pose this question as you're answering the question that you had up on your mind initially. Why can't we just remove the officers and replace them with social workers? As you talk about, showing love and having relationship in ways that carry you through, why wouldn't that be a step? We're going to again go to Ms. Hendricks and then Ms. Howell.
I want to address a question you asked earlier about the difference between officers in the community and in the school, and if you do think there's a difference. I would say it depends. It's situational. Officers in the community, they usually respond to something after something that happens, like an accident or a crime. In schools, it's a chance for you to just interact with everyday officers when nothing technically bad is happening. But if they can, they try to take more progressive on stopping situations than coming after a situation is bad. So that's what I wanted to address.
So then from that question, as we turn it over to our other student, Ms. Howell, and then from that, Mr. Humphrey, from that question, then rather than for schools as they're determining how they use officers, would it be fair to say shouldn't be used for discipline? Officers shouldn't be used as a reaction exclusively, such as when something such as a theft occurs, but should be used as part of the teaching fabric, going on field trips, connecting. Is that what you're saying, Ms. Hendricks? And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but they should be used in an ongoing, natural way as part of the faculty when there's not an incident. Is that accurate, Ms. Hendricks?
Yes, I would agree with that. In both, I think they should be used in both instances, but yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, Ms. Howell and then Mr. Humphrey.
I disagree with the choice to take SROs out of the school because, like Chris said, what if there's an incident and what if there's an intruder? The police might take a long time to get to the building But if we have an SRO already in the building, he could do something to diffuse the situation and take some of that fear away from everyone, knowing that he's already in the building taking care of the situation.
Thank you. We'll turn it over to Mr. Humphrey. Then I'll ask the question, before Mr. Humphrey speaks, is there anybody on the screen that wants to be a police officer or a public defender or an attorney? Raise your hand if you're thinking that's what you're going to go into. Okay, both Ms. Hendricks, Matthew is as well, Jeff, okay, Mr. Moore. All right, we'll turn it over to Mr. Humphrey.
All right, so I'm going to be building off of what Destiny Howell was talking about, and I'll be addressing the question about whether or not we should replace police officers with social workers. I feel like the police officers in our school provide a very important layer of safety for us, because I'll knock on wood and hope it doesn't happen, but it's very possible that in 5 seconds there could be an active shooter in our building. I'm confident that our police officers will be there to keep us safe, and I feel like the police officers and social workers serve two different purposes.
Thank you. So you need social workers and police officers. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. All right. We posed a question about who wanted to go into either law enforcement or be an attorney. What were those jobs, Mr. Moore? What were you wanting to be? And we'll go up to our other two students. And if you could just share, what is it you wanted to be after high school and college?
It's not a for sure career path for me, but it's definitely an avenue that I've explored. Being a public defender, basically because I like for people to have their rights heard, and basically I just prefer everything to be ideal for everybody. I think that is a big role that police play in our community, is just trying to help out when things are going awry or things going wrong. So that's one thing that I think I personally believe in, is just helping others.
Thank you. And our other two students?
I would like to be a criminal attorney, probably a prosecutor.
Thank you.
Well, I've actually had this goal in mind for several years. I've always wanted to be a police officer, mainly in part due to my involvement with the Topeka Police Explorer program. I've been pretty close to police for a long period of my life, and I really enjoy the idea of helping people and being that pillar in society that somebody can lean on. And yeah.
So for those that are listening that don't know what the Topeka Explorer program is, let me ask you this question. Should the police force reflect the community that they serve? You know, the people that live in this community, should they reflect that? Everything from the residents to the diversity. And if so, how do we ensure that we create a pipeline of building the police force from this community in which they serve? Can you share a little bit more? You mentioned both TCALC and the Explorer program, and now your desire to be an officer. Can you share how that's occurring so that others learn from that?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I first got involved with the Topeka Police Explorers, I at that point hadn't really had any involvement with law enforcement, negative or positive. I wasn't even considering the idea of involving myself with that career field.
And what grade was that?
When I first joined, I was a freshman in high school. So I was 14. And when I first got involved with that, I realized how nice it was to have that structure of support with all these officers kind of backing you. And that's always been a feeling that I've wanted to impart into others, because it's an amazing feeling. In terms of how you could maybe get other members of the community to feel that way, I would say the easiest way to do it would be more and more community outreach programs, more ways to get law enforcement involved with the community at all. I actually worked it with the Explorers, but we did a trunk or treat thing where it was all these police officers in uniform that were giving out candy to little kids that would walk by, and seeing these bonds being built between officers and younger citizens. I would say that that's kind of the very definition of a good community outreach program.
as opposed to when something happens in the community, law enforcement comes in an ongoing way being engaged in the community. Thank you. Mr. Humphrey, did you have your hand up?
No, sorry, I forgot to lower it.
No, not a problem. All right, we are now at the end of this 11 o'clock hour, and we're going to open this up. If there's anything that hasn't been said, we'd like for it to be said in this space as we prepare to close on out. We do want to just kind of throw out there the acknowledgement that, you know, and I guess in question, is it, you know, fair to say as we close on out, that some individuals may have a different experience than what you have at Topeka High, and there is fear in the community to some degree within some people. Is that fair to say? And just a good head nod would let me know, and if we're all on that same page. So we're acknowledging that, but we're also talking about how do we unravel that. So any comments that you'd like to share that maybe didn't come up in this space? When the final comment is made, we're going to ask for one word that's on your mind that you'd like to share for our students, and then we're going to ask our adults to stay on. Ms. Morrissey is going to close us out on the student end, starting with Mr. Hicks, then Mr. Frazier. Final comment that you'd like to say?
All right, I just wanted to ask a question to Matthew, because I know he had said something about a trunk or treat. I wanted to know what percentage of the kids you said that came through were actually African American or minority. It's just an interesting question.
Well, as you know, in Topeka, we do have a large portion of African American citizens, and I would say that from the naked eye, I can't give you exact numbers, obviously, but I'd say just about half or about 40% of the kids that came through are African American. And some of them had even talked, some of their parents even talked about not exactly having positive experiences with the Topeka Police Department, because every time the police show up, normally at your house, it's not for something good. It's for something bad. That's why the police show up. And a lot of these younger individuals don't always get the opportunity to establish that they're there to help because something bad's happened. And some parents might not necessarily explain that to their kids, but I would say it was a large portion of children there that were African American.
Where can you share why you asked the question? And that's a really good and important question. And thank you for the very detailed answer.
I was just, you know, asking the question because a lot of times I do find when people say they tried to mow kids, it's oftentimes little white kids. And I was just wondering, you know, like how many of African American parents or people who raise their kids would actually bring, just simply based off what they believe or what they feel or how they feel, how many are actually going to bring their kids to an event where they know that police presence is going to be there. It was just a thing because a lot of times we often try to put on what our kids, what we believe. So if I have a negative outlook or a negative opinion of police, might or most likely are going to pass it down to my son. So I was just wondering, like, how many of those people that came were actually, you know, African American from my community?
That's a very good question. And how do we change that, Mr. Hicks? And then we'll turn it over to Mr. Frazier. For those that are afraid or those that are passing down maybe experiences that are not positive or those that just want to stay away from community policing, how do we change that?
I really can't give you an exact answer. My opinion, I feel like it happens when you put them in the schools. It changed the outlook for me. It changed the way how I feel about police. And if we're ever going to get to a place where, you know, the stigma is broken or that chain or that weight is being lifted off the Black and the police community, it has to start with our young people. It has to. So that would be my, you know, my little input, that it will have to start with the young people.
Oh, appreciate that comment. Thank you, Mr. Hicks. Last two comments, Mr. Frazier, and then Mr. Humphrey.
Yes. So me as a student and my fellow students, at a point in time, I never liked police just because of what I saw on TV. But when I start actually talking to, and he talked to me, and we've come around each other, become great friends, my SOR, I've actually started to like them. I see what they've done. They're willing to put down their life for art. They're willing to help us when we need help. They'll help us with homework, or they'll ask us how our day's going when we're really in an attitude. To me, they're like a comfort to other students, I know their comfort. Some students may still not dislike them, but I feel like I've always told this, don't judge a book by its cover. Me, I judged the book by its cover, but then I started reading the story in the pages, and I started to like that book. So it started warming up my heart, and I started actually liking police. And then my little cousin, he told me that he wanted to be a police officer. So it made me do like, it like warmed up my heart that he wanted to become something that helps people out and make sure that people are safe, because we really need that.
Thank you, Mr. Frazier. Well said. Don't judge a book by the cover, read the story in the pages. We appreciate that. All right, last comment, Mr. Humphrey.
Okay, so I feel like a lot of the issues and the negative opinions and stigmas surrounding police, I feel like a lot of it's systematic. And I think one way that we can address that is by requiring like more extensive training for police officers. I know in other countries, the training to become officers is pretty extensive. And here in the US, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure there's an academy you go to. And after that, you can become a police officer. And I feel like with if we require more training, it would lower the amount of like mistakes that mistakes that would happen when interacting with police. Just recently, there was a headline about a police officer who mistakenly drew their gun instead of a taser, and that resulted in a fatality, I believe. And I feel like that could have been easily like avoided, especially if we had more extensive training.
So extensive training, and would that also include training on issues of diffusing situations, race, implicit bias? Do you agree that training in all areas that could contribute to how one might view individuals or community or situation? Do you think all of that, Mr. Humphrey?
Yes, I believe that we should have overall more extensive training.
Thank you for that.
Issues would be avoided if that were to happen. Yes.
No, we appreciate that. And we heard your bell. Both of your bells just rang. We know that it is at the 11:07 hour. We don't want to keep you from your class unless there's anything else that you'd like to share in this space. Again, we want to thank all of you all. This was YouTube. We're actually jotting down some of your quotes and posting those on Facebook so people hear your voices. As Mr. Hicks said so well, change will only happen really from young people expecting it, demanding it, but also being part of it. So we appreciate you teaching others and educating the broader community. All right, we're going to let you all go as you sign on off. The last word, final word, if you had one word to throw out there, can you share that one word? And actually, can you just put it in the chat, because we know many of you all want to go. If you want to voice it, feel free. Mr. Hicks?
It would be a quote. Gandhi said, change, be the change you wish to see in the world, and you can't have change until you have a conversation. So I thank you for allowing us to have this opportunity to have a conversation and to eventually make change.
Yes, sir. All right, we're definitely going to be re-putting that quote on social media. Thank you so much. Anybody else that has that final statement, if you want to just jot it in the chat, just one word. For me, it's energize. But whatever word you want to kind of put in there, and then we'll be capturing that and throwing that out there for others to see. We do want to share that as we continue this work and empower young people, if you have that one word to put in the chat to everyone, if you can chat, and you might not be able to, and I know they're all kind of coming in. Once you get your word in, we know the 2 bells have rung, so we're going to go ahead and release you to go into class. Ms. Morrissey will make sure you're not marked late. And for our adults, if you could stay on for the remaining 20 minutes, that would be wonderful. Have a great rest of your day. Well, there's some powerful young people. We know with young people like that, my goodness, we are definitely in good hands in our future. And we thank everyone for helping our young people join us. For the purpose of this, many of the individuals remaining are staff. Do we have a parent also on? One of the parent? All right. And so thank you for our parent for being on the full time. We appreciate you. All right, we're going to start off with a question for a parent. We know we have people serving in different roles, classroom teacher, coordinator. We're going to start off with our parent in that same space. You saw those headlines. Can you share your thoughts about this national conversation, and should law enforcement police officers be removed from from schools. You have both a daughter and son, correct?
Well, actually, I have a daughter at French, and I have a daughter and a son at Topeka West.
Okay.
So thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak. But with the headlines that I saw, I think that the officers in the schools should remain. Speaking of my own situation, my kids really don't have a lot of involvement with police officers besides the SRO officers that are at the school. Seeing how everything's being played out in the media, all the negativity that's going on in the media, if they don't have a positive side to look at and to role model, it might be kind of scary for them being out in the real world and being approached by an officer, being scared and seeing what that outcome would be like. I think having that positive energy in the school, the interaction is what at least my kids need. And a lot of the other kids that don't have the common interactions with police officers. I think it would be very helpful from that aspect.
So from what our students said, from a parent's perspective, it sounds like the students felt like, I think Mr. Hicks shared, and he was from a different school, Jardine and T-High, that the early exposure changed his perspective. And it sounds like you feel the same way. The exposure in schools can change and or build the bridge that is needed for when they leave schools. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, and I understand what he's saying. I also think the early exposure can kind of depend on if it's positive or negative. I heard someone else say, one of the other students, about the whatever your family, your parents, however they portray the officers, it kind of trickles down the chain to the kids, just like with other things, racism or whatever else, that goes down and reflects on the children. If they have that positive interaction or that positive relationship, yeah, it definitely will help at an early age.
Thank you. And you make a good point, because schools that have law enforcement used as disciplinarians, as an example, or in negative ways only, that also can shape their perspective moving forward. Thank you for sharing that. From the teacher perspective, Ms. Canty, and I saw you nodding your head, and you work with a lot of our students, particularly our African-American students, in programs that really uplift and support all of our students, but particularly the marginalized students. Can you share a little bit about your experience and what you've seen to be the bridge builder, and if in fact you feel officers should be removed or should be in schools in terms of that perspective? So what's been the bridge builder that you've seen, and should we continue to have officers in schools? When Ms. Canty's done, Dr. Morrell, if you can speak to programs that you're part of or have implemented to really build that bridge as well, that would be helpful. Ms. Canty?
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. I do believe that there is a place for police officers in our school building, and I do think it's really important when it comes to optics. That I think that becomes the issue for people. Police, when you say police and then you show an officer in school, that can be scary, especially if you're reading the headlines. But the reality of it is, I think having resources in school, and like you said, social workers as well. 21st century, I think that's what we need. In my interactions with students around the issues of police brutality, whenever there's a situation that occurs nationally and or even locally, there's always a conversation behind it. And I always allowed students to talk about it. And we've even had in the past, I've had some of the resource officers and one of my former students that graduated from Topeka High, he's a police officer currently, and I've had him come back and he's talked to the students, and they really appreciate having the chance to actually talk and ask some hard questions to these officers.
So Ms.
Police officer.
Ms.
I'm
Kent,
sorry.
let me ask you this. So are you saying then the courageous conversation in the right way could and should be facilitated if the training is there behind it and within the classroom, so that we don't shy away from talking about issues that kids are facing in the community?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're 1000% correct. And I think we can't continue to just pretend as if it exists or that it doesn't exist, and that the relationship with police officers is the same for everyone. I mean, we do a disservice to our community, to our students, and to ourselves by perpetuating that myth. So having options and opportunities to talk to our police officers, I think is vital. But the police officers that they encounter in school, the kids will tell you they enjoy the officers that are in school. It's a totally different thing. And I've been talking about some of the kids that have had negative experiences with police outside of school. They said, well, these aren't the same type of police officers, Miss Candy, that came to our house and that harassed our family. They said, they're different. They said, we're talking about the police department. So they make a distinction. So your rank and file police officer that you may meet on the street may or may not have the same type of relationship with you as the police school officer, resource officer. And so I think we have to be cognizant of that.
Thank you, Ms. Canty. Dr. Morrell, and then we're going to circle back to Mrs. Morrissey, because you touched on restorative practices and some things that you do within your building. Dr. Morrell, can you share programs that are bridge builders and systems that you've put in place, and if you've actually seen any students benefit from that? I think you're still on mute, sir.
At TCALC, we have the Law and Public Safety Program, and it's been in operation now for 2 years, which allows the students to get to know the officers that we've been talking about all morning. But it's more than getting to know the officers, it's getting to know about the law and the things that are involved in enforcing the law. So it's not only the police officers that they see as their teachers in the classroom, but they have the opportunity through the participation in the Law Enforcement Explorer program to get to know all aspects of the criminal justice system. So they meet prosecutors, they meet deputy sheriffs, they meet state police officers, et cetera. They work in various offices. And we all have some students this year that are interns for the local police department, as well as for security at the Stormont Vale campus. So they're learning about how police officers react or act, I shouldn't say react, but act and respond in various situations. And it's been very positive. And one of the good things about the classes are that the students actually, at a certain point in time, end up leading the classes. They are very interested in what's happening in the law and why it's happening. So they ask very good questions and they do a lot of good research. So it's very positive, very positive.
Thank you. And have you had a student move into interning or any of that since this has started 2 years ago? And this started from your relationship with the chief of police, is that correct? And
that's correct.
You agreed to change the pathway to diversify the community policing. Is that how this all started?
That's correct, because we wanted, the department wanted to grow its own and we wanted to be a partner in that. So it's been a very good 2-year process. Right now, we do have 2 students that are interning with the police department's training unit, and that has been very positive.
Thank you. All right, so with that, moving back to our parent, Ms. Thompson Howell, I see your hand is up. Did you have a comment that you'd like to make?
Yeah, just thinking about the comment the lady after me made, I started thinking about when kids are little and they see a police officer, they will run and everybody wants to be with the officer and, have conversation and just be acknowledged. And you see as they get older, that wanting to congregate around an officer goes away or it doesn't exist anymore. So it makes me think, where does that breakdown take place and why does that breakdown take place? And that's something, if we can find the answers to that, that might help better bridge the relationships.
Thank you. Thank you for that observation of the opportunity we have within schools as bridge builders with that comment in mind. Ms. Morrissey, you were going to talk a little bit about restorative practices and how things have changed. I see Ms. Hoffman has her hand up, so we'll circle around. If there's a comment that you'd like to make, Mr. Munoz or Mr. Kelly, that just kind of you'd like to share in this space, feel free to jump in after those two leaders speak. Mrs. Morrissey?
First of all, I just want to say how impressed I was with our young people. I think they articulated it as clear as you could possibly say it. And I think their perception is so real and it means more than anything adults could say we think is happening. So I felt affirmed. The key for us is hiring, making sure, I think that's true in any organization, good teachers, you hire well, you retain the ones that are good. That's certainly important. But I think that the way restorative practices has really fit into this is because of the relational value. So restorative practices is about working alongside people, building relationships, and although jobs are different, that key is that relationship between the people. Our officers, the ones that we have now, are phenomenal. They speak to kids, they're out and about. It's about prevention, it's about early intervention. They've even talked about the fact that sometimes they're called into those situations that happen outside school hours because they do know the students involved, and that changes the dynamic. So I think it expands what the local police can do when they know that we have resource officers who may have connections to our students. And if you'll humor me, Dr. Anderson, I've even had a restorative circle, and I want to share the story, and I won't blast out the officer himself, but I'd like to give a kudo and a shout out to the Shawnee County Sheriff's Office, because a few years ago, we had an incident occur at one of the neighboring schools where kids started to rush the floor and a couple of kids were grabbed, and 2 students showed up in my office the next morning. Actually hadn't even talked to their parents. They came straight here, which tells you that we have a good relationship in the building with our kids when they think there's an issue. One was African-American, one was white, but they felt like that the one kid had been grabbed and treated harshly because he was Black. It was their perception. Whether it was true or not didn't matter, and I knew it. So I made a call, and the officer involved actually willingly came out and did a circle with those students. And we talked about, all the questions. So how did this harm everybody? Who else was harmed? How do we fix it? And then the last is, how do we move forward? How do we change this? It was powerful. I was so proud of that officer and how he interacted with our kids. They got a totally different perception. They understood he was just grabbing the closest people to him to get them off the floor, to keep the players on the floor safe, and talked through it. I think he had some real feedback from students about how he might do that in a way that was better received, or things he could have said that he didn't say. But it was such a wonderful process, and everybody walked away from that feeling supported instead of attacked. So I think messaging after the fact, which is what restorative practices does that even when there's an exclusionary practice or there's a bad intervention, if there can be follow-up conversations so that everybody can talk to one another, I think we can eliminate some of the misperceptions that are out there, and we certainly can rebuild relationships when they're caused to be broken. And that's kind of how that fills in and why I am so passionate about restorative practices.
Thank you for that. And with that perfect example of how that looks in your school and how you've integrated officers, this issue of are there real issues within the high school in which, in addition to prevention, that officers are needed?
There are certainly occasions where we need an officer to step in and help us protect. Sometimes it's people coming in from the outside. Occasionally it's a student inside, although I will tell you that's very rare. What I find My daughter called me after the Sandy Hook shooting, kind of choked up, and she's concerned about me being here, and she has always felt much better that we have officers in the building, that there's someone here to protect us, because I think that's less likely to happen, and that's the most severe. But there's certainly situations in the neighborhood where, because they're connected to our local police, even though my officers happen to be TPS officers, they are up to speed on what's going on, and we can shut the campus down. We can make sure people are aware, even our families sometimes are aware of what might be going on in the neighborhood, and they help us keep our families as well as our students safe and up to speed on what's going on. So I think there are a lot of reasons they're here to protect us that go far beyond. If I only had officers in the building to do felony arrests, I would need officers in my building. There are so many more reasons they're here, and they're interacting with both our adults and our students. I think keeps our whole community safer.
So am I hearing you say it's a rarity for an officer to actually be making arrests as their role in the school, actually the role of sharing and updating what matters in the community and being preventive and restorative circles is really the utilization for you within your building?
Yes, ma'am, absolutely.
Thank you. On the heels of that, we have a middle school principal that's with us, Ms. Hoffman. Ms. Hoffman, can you share in terms of your utilization and what does that look like from a middle school perspective for a school resource officer at French, and how might one utilize a resource officer? Ms. Hoffman, can you start off with, do you use your officer for discipline, suspensions, and things like that?
No, no. Not at all. In fact, now when we have hands tied and a teacher might be having an issue with the student, he may respond. But I tell you, oftentimes he's like, hey, if you don't come and have a conversation with me, then I'm going to have to get Mrs. Hoffman. And the kids are more likely to go with him than they want me coming down there and visiting with them. It's kind of funny. But I am a huge proponent of having the SROs in the middle school, and I especially like having the Topeka Police Department for one of the reasons that Ms. Thompson-Howell mentioned about. I believe it's a tremendous strength, positive impact for true community policing. And I've been lucky to have two extremely wonderful SROs, Officer Hilt. Ms. Thompson-Howell's children have been with me clear back since when I was at Eisenhower. So I've known her a long time, and I've been lucky to have two really good police officers who allow me and Miss Wagner or my assistants to do the job. They recognize that this is a place of learning and not a place of arresting. And while we do follow the law, and there are sometimes things fall out of my control, but they will allow me to do as much as I can within the building and bring them in as a resource and a way to educate kids. Now, this happens this way, and these are the consequences because we're inside the school and this is a place of learning. But if you were at the mall or if you were at the movies, it might go differently. And I just think it's real important for kids and youth to see police officers in a positive light. So mine doesn't do discipline. That's not the role. He's like an extra counselor in the building. It is rare to go by his office and not find kids in there having just conversations and stopping by. In fact, I sometimes have to get on Officer Campbell and say, the kids need to be in the classroom, Officer Campbell, not hanging out in your office. But he's out and about in the building. He's in classrooms. Teachers call upon him to help lead lessons in different aspects that are connected to their curriculum. But the other piece that he's a really important part in is the development of our crisis manual and how we conduct our drills. Both of the SROs that have been in my building have also been part of the response team for the Topeka Police Department. So they bring a unique piece of training in of how to respond in a crisis, such as an active shooter, or just in evacuating the building. And they have added components to our drill practice that have enhanced and made them better. And I feel like I don't know that you can be 100% prepared for a crisis, but I feel better with some of the training that they've provided students and our teachers. Parents, that connection to the community that Ms. Morrissey mentioned is absolutely critical because they have access to other information in the community that they can bring to us and help us have a better understanding. And parents sometimes make appointments unrelated to school business with our SROs just to get some advice of how they might maneuver through the legal channels. He's a tremendous He is a tremendous resource to our building and a
Ms.
very
Hoffman,
positive
let me
piece.
ask you this, does he do home visits?
He does. He absolutely does. He has made plenty of home visits with us throughout the school year, especially during the pandemic. He goes with me. He'll go with our counselors and social workers to check on attendance. Sometimes we have parents calling requesting him to come to the home if they have a student who doesn't want to come to school, not because he's the police, but because he has a good relationship and he does a great job with working with kids, that he often can coax the student to come on into school and have some time. He is a part of many of our students' behavior plans that require that, where they pick him as the reward and want to walk the perimeter of the building when he's doing that, or shoot some hoops in the gym once in a while. He makes home deliveries all through remote, even when he was back on the streets and working a normal shift for the police department. I could call him up and say, Campbell, I've got 5 deliveries of art supplies and textbooks that need to get to kids, and it's Chromebook that needs to be swapped out. Where are you? And he would come and pick it up and he'd go take care of it.
So Ms. Hoffman, it sounds like as we're at this 11:29, 11:30 hour, that you've used your officer again as part of the teaching faculty to deliver supplies, to connect with students, to be the reward for students who want to select them as a mentor. And you've really incorporated them on, again, the preventive end in a different way. And yours is a TPD, it's a Topeka Topeka Police Department person. Unlike Ms. Morrissey, yours is TPS, Topeka Public Schools, 2 different departments where we have our own, as well as we partner with the community. But you just mentioned a very important piece, that if something happens in the school, that if it were in the community would be considered a criminal offense. But if it happens in the school, that's the opportunity to not treat it as a criminal offense, but then to treat it as an opportunity to connect with families and to say, if this were to happen later. Thank you for mentioning that. That's another key piece.
Dr. Anderson, if I could just say one more thing, I promise I'll be brief because I know you're wanting to turn people loose. But one of the reasons I feel like having the TPD in the middle schools is then kids connect, like Miss Thompson Howell, they build a positive relationship at a younger age that often carries on through the high school. So there are times when Topeka West might have something going on with the student, and they know that the student knows Officer Campbell because the student has mentioned them, the family has mentioned him, and he goes up there and will help facilitate a process there and often de-escalate. So I just think it's critical in building that community policing and setting our police in a more positive light and bridging that relationship with our youth.
Thank you, Ms. Hoffman. That social emotional connection, really almost as a social worker counselor, sounds like the key piece that needs to really be looked at as that core. I'm going to turn this over as it's 11:30, but Mr. Munoz or Mr. Kelly or anyone else that would like to make a final comment, if there's something that wasn't said that you feel the need to say, and if not, then we're going to go ahead and proceed and conclude momentarily. Mr. Munoz, is there anything that wasn't said that you'd like to say, sir?
Yes, thank you. One quick thing I will say is that I think communication is a strong piece, a good piece of moving forward. And what Jack K has done is that we have invited law enforcement to come into the classroom to speak about what their daily activities, what do they do, how they help the school out, what are some of the things they do to help students with ride-alongs, and then to answer those hard questions that students may have and understanding law enforcement and how to work well with it so we both can survive peacefully.
And Mr. Munoz, for those that aren't familiar with Jack K, can you just kind of share that acronym, what that is for those that are listening?
Yes, JAG K stands for Jobs for America's Graduates, Kansas.
So again, that school to career pipeline is yet another opportunity to introduce young people. Thank you for mentioning that, Mr. Munoz. Mr. Kelly, is there anything that didn't come up that you felt the need to say in this space?
Pretty much, I would just probably be repeating everyone, other than it does give a broad perspective on like students and how they feel and interact with officers. But I do say that it works well on the other side too. Now officers get to see the perspective and become advocates for some of our students, because that's probably, it's a partnership in that, I guess, in that, so to speak, to say that is, there's, like Ms. Morrissey touched on about hiring good people. I think we've had amazing people, officers that are here that, I mean, they smile, they walk through the halls. I mean, I've had an experience being at Shawnee Heights where I've seen officers were totally different. You know, it's just a different feel with those officers compared to what we've had here at Topeka High. But
So,
other
Mr.
than
Keller, to your point, every school and every community is different. Every city is different. In fact, even one of the points that, you know, in some schools, they have tasers, and ours, they don't.
Yeah.
So literally every community and how they utilize officers is different, but you all have given some lessons to take away from. It is 11:34. Ms. Morrissey, did you want to close on out? And Dr. Gray, my apologies. Was there any matter, sir, that you wanted to mention? All right. Mrs. Morrissey, do you want to close us out with the final comment?
Absolutely. I just want to, first of all, thank you, Dr. Anderson, for having this opportunity today to hear student voices. And I think it speaks perfectly to what restorative practices is, which is so often adults do things to kids, we make decisions for kids. And the whole point of restorative practices of our community policing is that we are doing things alongside students and with students and kids and families. And that truly changes how we do business, and it makes us a part of our communities again, instead of an isolated service within our community. So thank you.
Well said. Thank you, Ms. Morrissey, and all who are on this screen today, giving us a little bit of your time. We know it is an investment of time to educate the public. This will be on our YouTube permanently, and then also forwarded to other members of our community who may want to get a little insight about schools from both students and other community members. Have a great rest of your day. Stay